What's up, people? I'm Shaggy, the Opinionated Hippie, continuing my deep dive into Frank Zappa's unofficial and official live catalog. This is the second tour I'm tackling, which is the Mothers of Invention reunion tour of 1970, a short little 6-show tour of which we have 3 bootleg recordings available. This is the second of the shows I'm talking about, May 9th, 1970 at the Fillmore East in New York. This tour was put together because Frank wanted to play music with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. They were going to do pieces of 200 Motels, but they would only agree to do it if the Mothers of Invention played. The Mothers of Invention had been disbanded. Not everybody wanted to play with Frank and the Mothers of Invention anymore, is my understanding. So he got together those that would, added a couple more pieces, did 6 shows, the final show being the one in Los Angeles with the Philharmonic, which will be the next show I talk about next week because we do have a tape of that. But this reunion band that Frank put together, Ray Collins, Billy Mundy, Don Preston, Ian Underwood, Motorhead, and then the new additions, at least to the touring version, Frank had done stuff with them. Otherwise, Ainsley Dunbar and Jeff Simmons on bass. Yeah, and it's an interesting, really interesting set list. It is very much, we get some Mothers energy from the 60s, but we definitely get some, this is where we're going to be over the course of the next year for sure, and mix it up a little bit in 71 in the Flo and Eddie era with Dunbar on drums, Simmons sticking around for the rest of this year. This show, a better sounding show than the previous one. I think a much better sounding show than the previous one. Just a much more enjoyable listen. Sonically, it still sounds like an audience recording in a large echoey hall. I've been to the Fillmore West, never went to the Fillmore East, obviously. That is pretty much just a nice rectangular room, kind of high ceilings, balconies around the edge. Sound in there was always fantastic. The sound of this tape sounds like a bigger, more cavernous environment. I don't know if that's the case, but it has that quality to the sound. But I do think you get a good sense of what the band sounds like. There are definitely moments where I'm like, man, I wish we had a really good sound quality version of this show because I bet there's layers of stuff I'm not picking up. But a lot of the solos come through. You get a good sense of the band. But I would say, as with any Ainsley Dunbar era bootleg, Dunbar's drums just kind of take over the sound. Dunbar is just a beast. And a lot of 70 and 71 bootlegs, it's just like every other instrument is fighting their way through Dunbar. Here we have 2 drummers because Elliot's here. So they're fighting their way through both drummers. So that is the dominant sound you hear. But I think there's enough of the other music shines through. You get a good sense of what this band sounds like. In the intro, when they come out, Frank talks about this is not the Mothers of the 60s. We're not just going to walk on stage and make things up as we go. We actually have a set list. We're going to play the hits. The audience laughs at that. You don't have any hits, buddy. Frank was really sort of antagonistic in the previous show towards the audience. He is still kind of in a weird space right here as far as when he talks and the things he says. He always he's very mocking in general of the rock establishment and, of playing the hits and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, there's something about his attitude in the previous show and even in this show where it just seems like his arrogance is just a little too much and he needs to tone it down. I think that's part of what makes him a genius. He is a musical genius. We're not going to deny that. But there's an arrogance that goes with it that sometimes, at least for me, can be off-putting. And a lot of times in his introductions, and we get a Tiny Sick Tears, like a 9 minutes Tiny Sick Tears, where Frank is narrating the goings-ons of a teenager, a teenage person narration, as he calls it. And it's just, I don't know, sometimes it's just a little too, not that entertaining, I'll be honest, but we'll get to that in a while. But this is a weird show. There are parts of this show that I think are absolutely inspiring, and there are parts of this show that kind of seem a little bit tired, that kind of seem like Frank just hobbled together a band and is making them play music so that he can get to the end when he gets to play with the Philharmonic, which is what he wants to do. So it's an interesting show. If it is in the vault, I think yes, let's release it because it would be awesome to hear this in good sound quality. But for the most part, I don't know. I think this tape, this isn't doesn't seem it doesn't seem like an essential part of Frank Zappa's history. It really is almost like this connecting piece between the '60s mothers and what would be the Flo and Eddie era. Opens up with this medley of Who Needs the Peace Corps and the Duke of Prunes. Both of them seem slower than they should be. It just seems like we need a little more tempo in these, though Who Needs the Peace Corps is just such an absolutely beautiful song. The drums are just amazing. Just the arrangements of the drums, the interaction between the two drummers, everything about the drums is just fantastic. We eventually, after playing Who Needs the Peace Corps, we slide into Duke of Prunes. It also seems very slow. Really nice piano action in this. We get this awesome, what I think is an Ian piano solo possibly, but we get this really nice sort of piano-led jam once we play the Duke of Prunes theme, and then we get a guitar solo with that sort of kind of thin sound. This isn't a very cohesive guitar solo. There are moments where Frank seems to be putting together some pretty good ideas, but then it kind of always, he seems to like reach a point where he doesn't know what else to say and kind of, regathers his thoughts and then goes off on another little 10 to 20 seconds of an idea. Simmons sounds absolutely amazing on bass. There's really not much to the solo, and then we go back into Who Needs the Peace Corps to close out the song. An interesting little instrumental. I think it works really well. I think this is a pretty good pairing. I just think the tempo, I just wish the tempo was up a little bit. Then we get a Wonderful Wino, complete with the Bringing in the Sheaves intro. I actually think I prefer the Flo and Eddie era versions of this. I think the backing vocals that Flo and Eddie provide are actually pretty good. The solo is pretty cool, really nice scrappy solo. There's a solo in the middle of the song, and then after they do the return to the vocals, there's an ending solo that's longer than the middle one, a really nice jam. Really scrappy. Both solos have this scrappier energy, a little more rock and jagged edges than the Duke of Prunes solo. But good, fun song. I like Wonderful Wino. Then we could get How Could I Be Such a Fool? Just feels so slow. Though it is awesome to hear Ray sing, and it is absolutely fantastic. And there are moments in like between when Ray is singing, when you can kind of, the music's playing, like you can hear like little keyboard pieces that sound super interesting, but are kind of in and out of the mix just because the mix is so bad. I'm pretty sure it's an audience recording. And so this would be one that would just be beautiful to have and like pristine sound. That goes into Chunga's Revenge with the big opening. We get a saxophone solo in here that is absolutely awesome. The rhythm section is just going crazy. The drums are amazing. One of those squealing, just all over the place, making noises, frenetic type sax solo. That goes into a really cool low-key Don Preston keyboard jam that is a nice, it's not your Preston manic laboratory noisy energy, but a little more of a proggy synth vibe that works really well. Whatever Dunbar's playing in this part is super interesting. We go back and we return to the Chungus theme, then we get a Frank Zappa solo. Starts off with like, we start off with like some chords, kind of loose and fun and scrappy, and then we kind of build it and build it and build it. Really good solo. Frank's always done well in Chunga solos. Kind of gets weird at times, and almost like foreseeing the sort of 74 breakdowns that Frank's solos would have. Frank's solos would have. But a really good solo. And then we go back and have a pretty prolonged ending where we go back to the big theme, then we go back to the little theme, and we finish with the big theme, which is kind of interesting. And then this is the point where I think it just gets kind of tired, or maybe I'm just tired of this by this point. But we get the My Boyfriend's Back medley, which is a bunch of like shorter snippets of like, 50s era, 60s era doo-wop type songs. It just sounds a little tired at this point. It sounds a little gimmicky. It sounds a little Vegas-y. Maybe I just don't want to hear these songs anymore. But that also just seems like Frank's like, okay, we're going to do this. This is a little shtick that we have to do this medley of songs. And then we go into this Tiny Sick Tears. It's pretty low-key, Frank does seem to be enjoying himself, but it goes on for 9 minutes. It is just, there are some interesting moments, but a lot of it is just like, Frank harping on teenagers, or the poodle lecture, Frank harping on women and poodles, or Frank the blue light, or what else from I Have Been in You. These long rants that he does, I don't know. I don't need to hear them very often, and they kind of get tired quickly. And this is another one. He's talking about cookies, oatmeal raisin for some reason, horny teenage persons. We get the Doors reference. The whole thing is kind of formed around the end. There's milk involved. It's just, I don't know. In the previous show, he said, or maybe it was the show after this and the dates are mixed up. And in the previous show, the tape I talked about last week, he goes, "Oh, I'm not going to do this. I'm tired of doing this." I'm like, oh, okay, good. Well, he's not tired of it tonight. So that I think is a weak point in the middle of the show. But then we go into Agon, nice little Stravinsky snippet. Then we go into Call Any Vegetable, which are really, really the drop into the solo, the dun 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 dun, dun, that part, that accelerating part is heavy. It is awesome. It is just really, really got some good hard rock energy. But then as soon as we actually get to the solo section, it's like, we calm down and things get really like meek and really just like we have lost all the energy that we had gathered in the first half of the song. We don't need that. And then after Frank does this really kind of laid back, chill, kind of jazzy solo for a while, then he starts to like step up and goes really, really super aggressive, and Dunbar goes off. Excellent second half of this solo. We just don't need the first half. We don't need that slow part, especially if you're going to give us such a powerful transition into the solo spot, and then do what would be kind of a defining feature of a lot of Frank solos in the 80s. Build up a lot of momentum, put on the brakes, and then solo. So yeah, I don't like it. But it's also a sign of things to come. But we don't need that slow section. Otherwise, it's a very, very good Call Any Vegetable solo. After that, we get a King Kong. Really nice King Kong. King Kong, always want to hear the ultimate monster song. We get a sax solo with a just absolutely crazy, crazy Dunbar going off. Really frantic solo. Frank does some conducting during this. We get some nice waves of what sounds like Preston organ coming in. Just a really, really cool vibe to this King Kong. It's very chaotic, but at the same time very controlled, something I think Frank is a master at. Then we go back into all the new King Kong themes that are like a connective tissue in the middle of this that would be around for like the Flo and Eddie era. Then we go into Igor's Boogie, which is just absolutely beautiful, just perfect. One of Frank's best decisions ever. The King Kong, Igor is back into King Kong medley. Phenomenal stuff. And then coming out of that, we get sort of a Ray Collins jam where Frank starts playing this like repetitive melody on the guitar, and then Collins starts like yodeling it, and then we kind of drop out and Collins gets like this sort of vocal solo. He's not really singing any words, he's just making noises. Really, really awesome. Dunbar's going crazy. We get this really frenetic build into this like drop where we get like a drum solo between Dunbar and Elliott. And then we come back into King Kong with just some crazy loud like guitar strumming, just like really just attacking type energy before we bring things down. And Frank's like, "It's been a lovely night, ladies and gentlemen." And then we go back into like a closing King Kong theme. Really fantastic King Kong with a Ray Collins vocal solo, which is him doing like some, I don't know if it's yodeling, but this weird almost like yodeling type singing that's absolutely beautiful. And then we go into the encore, in which we get a Little House I Used to Live In. Frank badmouths Valerie and that other shit. We're not going to play that. So we're going to do our teenage encore of Little House. It is absolutely awesome. What a fantastic song. We don't get the Ainsley Dunbar that Flo and Eddie would yell during those things, but really good version of that. If you see any tapes of this, it usually says Mud Shark on the tapes, but there is like this nice little 30-second segue from the end of Little House into Holiday in Berlin that would eventually evolve into Mud Shark, but that's all that is. But it's a really nice transition, some really nice organ in there. Then we go into Holiday in Berlin, which is, I would argue, one of Frank's top 5 songs. Just absolutely perfect, absolutely beautiful. The energy is just absolutely amazing. Really nice drop into the solo, though there is a kind of a harsh little tape cut briefly. We flirt around with that Inca theme. The theme that would go at the end of the solos in Inca came out of the beginning of the solos in Holiday in Berlin. Really nice. The solo is just this wah infested, Inca vibe infested, aggressive, tweaky, an amazing solo. Like, Frank is just like, you can see the development of Frank as a guitar soloist in this Holiday in Berlin. Like, we're definitely, as awesome as Hot Rats is for his solos, like, fantastic stuff. There is, he's stuck as the 70 in particular, especially with like the King Kong solos. He really starts to push the boundaries of what he can do and like take more time with ideas and be a lot more open to just like dramatic left turns or U-turns. And you're starting to feel that in this Holiday in Berlin solo. It gets really heavy. We get this really nice sort of meltdown into this really what feels like the conclusion of the solo, this like melodic phrase that gets repeated a couple times. And then we get this kind of real funky meltdown, but the band's just taking their time while Frank's kind of just calmly playing, and we're riding out the end of this song. An absolutely amazing Holiday in Berlin, and then that goes into a really nice heavy version of Cruisin' for Burgers to close out. It's got that weird, funky kind of psyche trippy arrangement that Frank is so fantastic at. Yeah, and that's the end of the show. Super solid show. I would say the latter half, like, it gets much better as it goes on. Once we get past the My Boyfriend's Back Tiny Sick Tears medley, and we get to a bunch of songs, well, not all of them, but some of the songs that weren't played in the previous show, but everything from A Gone, Call, King Kong, Igor's Little House, Holiday Cruisin', just top-notch stuff. The earlier stuff is good and would be awesome to hear, but it's really, after that second half of the show, I think is just some really fantastic stuff. Not going to put up a ranking of the two shows. I think this is the better of the two shows that we have so far. The 5/8, the sound is just so rough on that. I doubt I will go revisit that. It's just, the vibe is off on that one. Frank seems to be in a bad mood. There's some good stuff on it. It's just a much rougher listen. But this I think is a pretty, I mean, it's not an easy listen, but, you know, it was only 6 shows on this tour. We only have 3 of them, so it's a neat little snapshot of a very small portion of Frank's touring career. But yeah, those are my thoughts on this show. It's out there on the internets if you want to check it out. But yeah, I think that's all I got for now. If you check this out, let me know your thoughts on it. Subscribe, like, share, comment, so you can find out my thoughts on the final show of this tour, the one that does have the Los Angeles Philharmonic, right? And yeah, but that'll be next week. And then we'll move on to, I think, Winter 77. I think I'm going to do Winter 77 because that's not one I revisit often. So, and there's a reason, but we're going to do that one now and get it out of the way. But it's good, but just not one of his best. Anyways, we'll get to that in a couple weeks. That's all I got. Thanks for watching. Peace. Talk to you later.